I pushed open the diner's door, the familiar jingle of the bell welcoming me to another morning shift at Sam's place. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, a comforting scent that never failed to energize me. "Morning, Becky," Jim, our seasoned cook, called out from behind the counter. "Ready for another day of serving up smiles?" I chuckled, tying my apron strings. "You know me, Jim. Always ready to brighten someone's day with a hot cup of joe and a side of friendly banter." As I began wiping down the tables, the door swung open, and a well-dressed man stepped inside. His tailored suit and polished shoes stood in stark contrast to the diner's casual atmosphere. He scanned the room, his gaze finally settling on me. "You sure you got the right place?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Not often we see folks in suits around here." He flashed a confident smirk. "I heard you have the best waffles in town, and I'm ready to be convinced." There was something about his smooth demeanor that caught my attention. I gestured toward an empty booth. "Well, then, take a seat, and let's see if we can live up to the hype." As he slid into the booth, I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes lingered on me, a hint of curiosity flickering behind them. I grabbed a menu and approached him, our gazes meeting briefly. "What can I get for you, sir?" I asked, my tone professional yet friendly. "Greg," he corrected. "And I'll have the classic buttermilk waffles, please, with a side of that famous small-town charm, if you don't mind." His playful banter caught me off guard, but I couldn't deny the spark of interest it ignited within me. It had been a while since someone had engaged me in such a way. "Coming right up," I replied, offering him a genuine smile before heading back to the counter. As I placed the order with Jim, I couldn't shake the feeling that this Greg wasn't just another passing customer. There was something about him that felt different, like a breath of fresh air in my otherwise routine existence. Little did I know that this encounter would be the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about love, family, and the secrets that lie beneath even the most polished facades. From that first encounter, Greg became a regular at Sam's place. Every morning, like clockwork, he'd stroll through the door, his tailored suits a stark contrast to the diner's casual atmosphere. The other patrons couldn't help but steal curious glances, wondering what a man like him was doing in a place like this. But to me, Greg's presence became a welcome constant, a bright spot in my otherwise mundane routine. Our banter flowed effortlessly, and I found myself looking forward to his visits more and more each day. "Back again, I see," I'd tease as he slid into his usual booth. "Can't get enough of my charming wit and those famous waffles?" Greg would flash that disarming smile of his. "You know me too well, Becky. This place just wouldn't be the same without your sparkling personality." Our exchanges were always light and playful, but underneath, I sensed a genuine interest from him, a desire to know more about me and my life. And if I'm being honest, I felt the same curiosity about him. One morning, as I refilled his coffee mug, I couldn't resist asking, "So what's a guy like you doing in a place like this, anyway?" Greg leaned back, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Well, you see, I work in sales for a tech company downtown. Fancy suits and corporate meetings are part of the gig." I raised an eyebrow. "And yet, you choose to start your days in a greasy spoon like Sam's place?" He chuckled, taking a sip of his coffee. "What can I say? I appreciate the simple pleasures in life. Besides, where else can I find the best waffles and the most captivating company?" His compliment caught me off guard, but I couldn't deny the flutter it caused in my chest. It had been a long time since anyone had made me feel that way. As the weeks passed, our flirtation became more overt. Greg would linger a little longer after finishing his meal, and I'd find excuses to spend extra time at his booth. The chemistry between us was undeniable, and I found myself increasingly drawn to this man who seemed to defy all expectations. One morning, as I was refilling his coffee, our hands brushed together, sending a jolt of electricity through me. Our eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted. The playful banter gave way to a charged silence, laden with unspoken possibilities. Greg cleared his throat, his gaze holding mine. "Becky, would you do me the honor of joining me for dinner tonight? Somewhere a little more upscale than Sam's place?" My heart raced as I processed his invitation. Was I really ready to take this step to explore whatever was brewing between us? One look into his earnest eyes, and I knew my answer. I'd love to, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. As Greg flashed that heart-stopping smile, I couldn't help but feel like I was embarking on a new chapter, one that would challenge everything I thought I knew about life, love, and the secrets that lay beneath even the most polished exteriors. The days leading up to my first real date with Greg were a whirlwind of nervous anticipation. As I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing out the fabric of my simple navy dress, a million thoughts raced through my mind. What if I didn't live up to his expectations? What if our chemistry fizzled outside the comfortable confines of Sam's place? "You look amazing, Becky," Lisa, my best friend and roommate, assured me as she leaned against the doorframe. "Greg won't know what hit him." I forced a smile, trying to shake off my doubts. "I just don't want to disappoint him, you know? He's so polished, and I'm just a small-town girl working at a diner." Lisa scoffed, stepping forward to adjust the strap of my dress. "That's exactly what he finds so charming about you. Embrace it, girl. Own your authenticity." Her words resonated, and I took a deep breath, steeling my resolve. Greg had seen something special in me, and I owed it to myself, to us, to let that shine through. When I arrived at the cozy, upscale restaurant Greg had chosen, he was already waiting, looking every bit the dashing gentleman in his crisp suit. As our eyes met, his face lit up with a warm smile that instantly put me at ease. "You look stunning," he murmured, taking my hand and pressing a gentle kiss to my knuckles. I felt a blush creep up my cheeks at his chivalrous gesture. "You clean up pretty well yourself." As we settled into our table, the conversation flowed effortlessly, just like it did at the diner. Greg had a way of making me feel comfortable, of drawing me out of my shell with his genuine interest and quick wit. Over the course of the evening, I found myself opening up to him in ways I never had before. I shared stories of my childhood, growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and my dreams of one day exploring the world beyond those familiar boundaries. Greg listened intently, his eyes never wavering from mine, and in turn, he offered glimpses into his own life. The pressure of living up to his family's expectations, the loneliness that often accompanied his success. As the night drew to a close and Greg walked me to my door, there was a palpable energy crackling between us. We lingered on the doorstep, our bodies gravitating closer, until finally, Greg cupped my cheek, his thumb brushing over my skin with a feather-light touch. "Becky," he murmured, his voice low and husky. "I know this might seem sudden, but I feel a connection with you that I've never experienced before. Would you be my girlfriend?" In that moment, any lingering doubts or insecurities melted away. I gazed up at him, my heart pounding in my chest, and nodded. "Yes," I breathed, and then his lips were on mine, igniting a fire that would forever change the course of my life. As we broke apart, foreheads resting together, I knew that this was only the beginning, the start of a journey that would test the boundaries of love, family, and the secrets that lay buried beneath even the most pristine facades. A few months into our relationship, Greg invited me to meet his family. I'll admit the prospect filled me with a mix of excitement and trepidation. These were the people who had shaped Greg into the man I had grown to care for so deeply. Would they approve of me, a small-town waitress with big dreams but humble roots? When we arrived at Greg's parents' stately home, my nerves were on edge. But as soon as his father, Ken, greeted us at the door with a warm embrace, I felt some of the tension ease. "Becky, it's a pleasure to finally meet you," Ken said, his eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. "Greg hasn't stopped singing your praises." I blushed, shooting Greg a playful glance. "Well, he has a way with words, that's for sure." As we stepped inside, I was immediately enveloped in a tight hug by Greg's grandmother, Evelyn, a spry, spirited woman with a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "So you're the one who's stolen my grandson's heart," she teased, holding me at arm's length to appraise me. "I can see why. You've got a fire in you, my dear." Her words put me at ease, and I found myself returning her warm smile. But as we moved into the living room, my gaze fell upon Greg's mother, Lorraine. She was a poised, well-dressed woman in her 50s, but there was a coolness in her eyes as she regarded me, a subtle disdain that sent a shiver down my spine. "Mother, this is Becky," Greg introduced, his arms snaking around my waist in a reassuring gesture. Lorraine offered a tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Charmed, I'm sure. Throughout the afternoon, Lorraine's thinly veiled barbs sliced through the otherwise pleasant atmosphere like razors. "So, Becky, what are your aspirations beyond waitressing?" she would ask, her tone laced with condescension. Or, "I do hope you're not leading my son astray with your small-town ways." With each dig, I felt my confidence waver, my insecurities bubbling to the surface. But Greg was always there, squeezing my hand, offering me a reassuring smile. "Don't mind my mother," he murmured during a lull in the conversation. "She's just protective of me, of us. She'll come around." I wanted to believe him, but something in Lorraine's icy demeanor told me it would take more than time for her to accept me. As we were getting ready to leave, Evelyn pulled me aside, her eyes filled with a mixture of warmth and concern. "Don't let that girl get you down, Becky," she said, patting my hand. "She's got a lot to learn about what truly matters in this life." Her words were a balm to my wounded spirit, and I clung to them as Greg and I made our way back to my humble apartment. That night, as we lay tangled in each other's arms, I couldn't help but voice the worry that had been gnawing at me. "Greg, what if your mom never accepts me?" I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. He tightened his embrace, pressing a tender kiss to my forehead. "She'll come around, and even if she doesn't, I don't care. I want you, Becky. You're the one I choose." His words should have reassured me, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lorraine's disapproval was just the beginning. A dark cloud looming on the horizon, threatening to consume the happiness we had found in each other's arms. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of change as Greg and I strolled hand in hand through the park, the vibrant foliage a stunning backdrop to the moment. It was one of those perfect days that felt suspended in time, where the worries of the world faded into insignificance. As we reached the scenic overlook, Greg slowed his pace, turning to face me with a look of pure adoration in his eyes. "Becky," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "from the moment you walked into my life, you've been a constant source of light and laughter. You've shown me what it means to embrace every moment, to live life without apology or fear." My heart raced as he reached into his pocket, dropping to one knee before me. In his hand, a stunning diamond ring glistened in the golden sunlight. "You are the most extraordinary woman I've ever known," Greg continued, his gaze locked with mine, "and I want to spend the rest of my life by your side. Becky, will you marry me?" Tears of joy streamed down my cheeks as I nodded fervently, unable to find the words. Greg slipped the ring onto my trembling finger, and then we were in each other's arms, our lips meeting in a passionate kiss that sealed our promise to one another. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the disapproving glares from Lorraine, not the whispers of skeptics who doubted our love. All that existed was the two of us, bound by a connection that transcended societal boundaries and expectations. But as the initial euphoria faded and the reality of wedding planning set in, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. Lorraine's disdain for me had only grown more palpable with time, and the thought of her casting a shadow over our special day filled me with dread. "What if your mom never accepts me?" I voiced my concern to Greg one evening as we pored over guest lists and seating arrangements. He reached across the table, taking my hand in his and giving it a reassuring squeeze. "She'll come around, Becky, and even if she doesn't, I don't care. I want you, all of you, flaws and all. You're the one I choose forever and always." His words should have soothed my worries, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lorraine's disapproval ran deeper than mere protective instincts. There was a bitterness, a resentment in her eyes that hinted at something darker, a secret she harbored, one that threatened to cast a long shadow over our happily ever after. As the wedding date drew nearer, Lorraine's hostility became increasingly difficult to ignore. From subtle digs about my modest upbringing to thinly veiled comments about my ambition, her barbs cut deeper with each passing week. "Don't let her get to you," Greg would implore, wrapping his arms around me and pulling me close. "She's just having a hard time letting go." But even as I nodded and forced a smile, I couldn't help but wonder, was there more to Lorraine's animosity than met the eye? Was there a reckoning on the horizon? A truth that would shake the very foundations of our love and test the resilience of our bond? Little did I know, the storm was brewing, and its fury would be unleashed on the very day that was supposed to be the happiest of our lives. The morning of our wedding dawned bright and beautiful, the perfect backdrop for what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. As I slipped into my delicate lace gown, a flutter of nervous excitement danced in my stomach. Today, Greg and I would finally pledge our eternal love and commitment to one another, setting forth on a new chapter as husband and wife. The ceremony itself was a dream come true. Greg's eyes shone with unshed tears as I walked down the aisle towards him, and the vows we exchanged were a beautiful testament to the depth of our connection. Even Lorraine managed to paste on a thin smile, though her eyes betrayed a hint of resentment that she couldn't quite mask. But it was at the reception where the facade finally crumbled. As the guests mingled and danced, Lorraine took to the microphone, her perfectly coiffed appearance belying the venom that was about to spill forth. "A toast," she began, her voice sickly sweet, "to the happy couple." She turned her gaze towards me, and I felt a chill run down my spine at the contempt burning in her eyes. "Becky has certainly done well for herself, hasn't she?" Lorraine continued, her words dripping with condescension, rising above her humble beginnings and modest upbringing to secure a place in our world, a true Cinderella story, if ever there was one. The room fell deathly silent as Greg and I exchanged a horrified look. Lorraine's lips curved into a cruel smile as she raised her glass in a mocking salute. "Here's to ambition, and to never forgetting where you came from." The air was thick with tension, the shocked guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. But before Greg or I could respond, a familiar voice cut through the silence. Evelyn's. "Enough of this nonsense," the elderly woman declared, her frail frame trembling with righteous indignation as she snatched the microphone from Lorraine's grasp. Lorraine's eyes widened in surprise, but Evelyn didn't falter. "You want to talk about ambition and forgetting one's roots?" she challenged, her gaze boring into Lorraine's. "Then let's talk about how you wormed your way into this family, shall we?" A collective gasp rippled through the room as Evelyn turned to address the stunned guests. "This woman," she spat, gesturing towards Lorraine, "was nothing more than a gold-digging social climber when she met my son. She saw an opportunity for wealth and status, and she took it, lying, manipulating, and trampling on anyone who stood in her way." Lorraine's face had drained of color, her perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists at her sides. But Evelyn was relentless. "So, before you cast judgment on my grandson's wife, a woman of true substance and character, I suggest you take a long, hard look in the mirror, Lorraine, because the only Cinderella story here is the one you've been living, built on a foundation of deceit and greed." The room erupted into a chorus of gasps and murmurs, but all I could focus on was the stunned, devastated expression on Greg's face as he stared at his mother. In that moment, the scales had fallen from his eyes, and the truth, ugly and painful, had been laid bare. As for me, a strange sense of vindication washed over me. The resentment, the hostility, the barely concealed loathing that Lorraine had harbored towards me, it all made sense now. She had seen in me a reflection of her own past, a past she had desperately tried to bury and forget. And in that moment, as Lorraine fled the reception in disgrace, I knew that the battle had been won. The secrets had been exposed, and the karma she had sown had finally come full circle. But even as I basked in the victory, a part of me couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness for Greg. His world had been shattered, his illusions stripped away. And as I took his hand in mine, offering him a reassuring squeeze, I silently vowed to be the anchor he needed to weather the storm that was sure to come. In the aftermath of Evelyn's bombshell revelation, the reception descended into chaos. Guests scrambled to gather their belongings and make a hasty exit, their whispers and furtive glances a testament to the scandal that had just unfolded before their eyes. Greg and I, still reeling from the truth about Lorraine's past, retreated to a private room, seeking refuge from the prying eyes and hushed murmurs. As soon as the door closed behind us, Greg's composure crumbled. "How could she?" he choked out, his voice thick with anguish. "All these years, she's been lying to us, to me." I pulled him into a tight embrace, my heart aching for the pain he was enduring. "I'm so sorry, Greg. I had no idea." He pulled back, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You had nothing to do with this, Becky. My mother, She's the one who betrayed our trust, our family. A knock at the door interrupted our moment, and Ken poked his head in, his face etched with worry. "Son, are you all right?" he asked, his gaze flickering towards me with a silent question. Greg sighed heavily, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I don't know, Dad. I need some answers." Ken nodded solemnly, stepping fully into the room. "Your grandmother didn't mince words, did she?" A flicker of anger flashed across Greg's features. "So it's true? She was just after our money? Our status?" Ken's shoulders sagged, and in that moment he looked every bit his age, a man weary from carrying the weight of a long-kept secret. "Your mother and I met at a charity gala," he began, his voice laced with resignation. "She was a stunning socialite, and I was smitten. We courted, and before long, we were married." He paused, pinching the bridge of his nose as if steeling himself for what came next. "It wasn't until after the wedding that your grandmother began to voice her suspicions. She saw through Lorraine's act, the false sweetness, the calculated charm. She tried to warn me, but I was too blinded by love to listen." Greg shook his head, his jaw clenched. "And you never confronted her? Never demanded the truth?" Ken's gaze dropped to the floor, shame etched into the lines of his face. "I was a coward, son. I didn't want to face the possibility that the woman I loved was nothing more than a fraud." A heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the sound of Greg's ragged breaths as he struggled to process the weight of his father's confession. Finally, he turned to me, his eyes burning with a fierce determination. "Becky," he said, taking my hands in his, "I need you to know that you are nothing like her. You've shown me what it means to love without pretense, without ulterior motives." I squeezed his hands, offering him a watery smile. "I know, Greg, and I'm here for you, no matter what." He nodded, his jaw set in a firm line. "Then we need to find my mother and get the truth from her, once and for all." As we set out to locate Lorraine, a sense of purpose steeled my resolve. The secrets, the lies, the manipulations, they all ended here. Greg deserved to know the full extent of his mother's betrayal, and I would stand by his side, unwavering, as he confronted the harsh reality that had been hidden from him for far too long. Because in the end, the truth would set us free, free from the shadows of deceit, and free to build a life together, one founded on the unshakable bedrock of honesty and love. The confrontation with Lorraine was explosive, to say the least. We had tracked her down to a secluded corner of the estate's gardens, where she sat huddled on a wrought-iron bench, her perfectly coiffed facade in disarray. "Mother," Greg said, his voice steely as we approached, "we need to talk." Lorraine's head snapped up, her eyes blazing with a mixture of defiance and shame. "So, the truth is finally out, is it?" she spat, her lips curling into a sneer. "I suppose you're here to gloat, to revel in my humiliation." I opened my mouth to respond, but Greg squeezed my hand, silencing me with a pointed look. This was his battle to wage. "I'm here for answers," he said evenly. "All these years you've been lying to us, to me. I deserve to know why." Lorraine scoffed, tossing her head back in a haughty gesture. "Why? Because it was the only way, Greg, the only way to secure the life I deserved, the status I craved." Her words hung heavy in the air, their ugly truth laid bare for all to see. "I grew up with nothing," she continued, her voice taking on a bitter edge. "No money, no connections, just a burning ambition to escape the squalor of my upbringing." She fixed me with a withering glare, her lips twisting into a sneer. "You think I wanted to end up like you, Becky? A small-town nobody destined for a life of mediocrity?" Before I could respond, Greg stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Don't you dare speak to her like that," he growled. "Becky is 10 times the woman you'll ever be." Lorraine recoiled as if she'd been slapped, her eyes widening in shock. For a brief moment I saw a flicker of vulnerability, a crack in the carefully constructed facade she had built around herself. But just as quickly the walls slammed back into place, her features hardening once more. "Well then," she sneered, "I suppose you've made your choice, haven't you? The poor little waitress over your own mother." Greg's jaw clenched, his fists balling at his sides. "You're not my mother anymore, Lorraine. Not after all the lies, the manipulation. You're just a stranger. A toxic presence that I refuse to let poison my life any longer." His words hung heavy in the air, their finality ringing like a death knell. Lorraine flinched as if physically struck. her mask of bravado crumbling as the weight of Greg's rejection bore down upon her. For a long, tense moment, silence reigned, broken only by the soft rustling of the wind through the trees. Then, without another word, Lorraine turned on her heel and fled, disappearing into the shadows of the garden like a specter vanishing into the ether. As her retreating footsteps faded into the distance, I felt a strange sense of catharsis wash over me. The woman who had made it her mission to undermine me, to cast doubt and disdain upon our love, had been stripped of her power, her carefully constructed facade shattered, her true nature laid bare. Greg exhaled a shuddering breath, his shoulders sagging as if a great weight had been lifted. He turned to me, his eyes shining with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "It's over," he murmured, pulling me into a fierce embrace. "She's gone, Becky. We're free." As I clung to him, breathing in the familiar scent that had become my anchor in the storm, I knew that his words rang true. The battle had been fought, the secrets exposed, and the karma Lorraine had sown had finally come full circle. But more importantly, our love, our unwavering commitment to one another, had withstood the ultimate test. We had emerged from the ashes of deception and betrayal, our bond forged anew in the fires of truth and resilience. And as we turned our backs on the shadows of the past, hand in hand, I knew that our future burned brighter than ever before. A future built on the unshakable foundation of honesty, trust, and the kind of love that could weather even the darkest of storms.